Well, tonight, the fallout from federal charges against 3 former Trump campaign officials is rocking the nation's capital.
Yeah, this may be just the first round of charges, with more to come, and legal experts say the message being sent by the special counsel is, we're not bluffing. KCAL9 political reporter Dave Bryan is here now to break it down for us.
Plenty of drama, and again, like you said, this may be just the beginning. So why does this matter so much? Well, the charges come on a day when Facebook reportedly plans to tell Congress that 126 million people may have seen content produced and circulated by Russian operatives before last year's election. So as the legal sparring now begins, the stakes couldn't be higher.
There is no evidence that Mr. Manafort or the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government.
With his attorney calling the charges ridiculous, former Trump presidential campaign chairman Paul Manafort and Manafort's former business partner Rick Gates pleaded not guilty to 12 counts, including conspiring against the United States. The 31-page indictment charges that over at least 10 years, the two men set up schemes to hide tens of millions of dollars in income, money they had received from a pro-Russian Ukrainian political party. Prosecutors charged the scheme was to funnel more than $75 million through secret overseas bank accounts, laundering tens of millions of dollars and lying to the IRS and the Justice Department.
He's the campaign chairman. There's no one higher than him except for one person.
Former federal prosecutor Peter Zeidenberg says the indictment could be used to flip Manafort and Gates in the Russia investigation.
Extremely strong, very serious charges.
President Trump introduced his 2016 campaign foreign policy team for the Washington Post in March of 2016. Among them, a young man in his late 20s.
George Papadopoulos. He's an oil and energy consultant. Excellent guy.
Court papers say Papadopoulos, who pleaded guilty last month to lying to federal agents, now admits he went to work right away setting up meetings with Russian operatives, who told him in April 2016 they had dirt on then-candidate Hillary Clinton, including thousands of emails. That was 2 months before the Democratic National Committee publicly blamed Russians for hacking their computers and stealing data, including emails. According to the court papers, Papadopoulos had been emailing and meeting Russian contacts on a regular basis. Ron Hosko is a former assistant director of the FBI who explained what the Russians were up to.
They were dangling some bait to someone who appeared to be very willing to grab that bait and pull the two orbits closer.
CBS News reports that ultimately that bait led to a meeting on June 9th last year in Trump Tower, when Donald Trump Jr., Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort met a Russian lawyer and others believing they had dirt on Hillary Clinton. Papadopoulos pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about meetings with those Russian connections.
And the question that's raised is, why did he feel the need to lie about it? And why did he feel the need to say that these connections happened before he joined the campaign? So I think that there may be a lot there. That to me is kind of the sleeper argument, the sleeper story that I think is just going to continue to gain momentum.
Today's announcement has nothing to do with the president, has nothing to do with the president's campaign or campaign activity.
The White House denial strategy for commenting on the 3 men involved in this case ran into some problems, like the facts. For example, Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders declared George Papadopoulos had minimal impact on the Trump campaign.
He was a volunteer on a council that met once.
So his activities were entirely of his invention. No one asked him to do any of these things. Is that what you're telling the American public?
All I can tell you is he asked to do things. He was basically pushed back or not responded to in any way. So any actions that he took would have been on his own.
But the guilty plea from Papadopoulos says otherwise. A Trump campaign supervisor told Papadopoulos, quote, "I would encourage you to pursue contact with Russians," and that he had done great work. On Capitol Hill, reaction to the day's developments was mixed. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said it's too early to make any judgments yet on what this all means, but he does have serious concerns.
What would bother me the most if a campaign associated themselves with the Russian government actively sought assistance from the Russian government or any other government. That would be bad.
San Mateo Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Speer told CNN the key to getting to the bottom of all this is flipping those who have now been charged by the special counsel. And she thinks President Trump knows exactly what was happening with Russia during the campaign.
I believe he was aware. And I think we will only find that out as days go by and as people want to reduce the potential risk of spending the rest of their life in jail, that we'll find out whether or not.
Well, the fallout from the indictments is even shaking up some Democrats. Democratic lobbyist Tony Podesta, the brother of Clinton campaign leader John Podesta, announced today that he's resigning from the Podesta Group, a company that did business with Paul Manafort that may have benefited a Ukraine regime that had strong connections with Russia. So this is all over the map now.
Dave, it's pretty clear that prosecutors are trying to pressure Manafort to tell all he knows by pressuring him with these charges that really have nothing to do or not directly related to the Russian investigation, the meddling investigation. But what's the significance of the Rick Gates being charged as well?
That's the big question about Gates. You know, there's so much we don't know about what evidence prosecutors might have about Gates and what he knows. He's the least known of the three men in many respects. The Washington Post reporting that Gates has been known in Washington to be Manafort's protege and his right-hand man. So one reason he's been indicted is this. Let's say the prosecutors really want to flip Manafort. Well, by indicting Gates, that means if Manafort is silent and refuses to work with prosecutors, then maybe Gates, who works so closely with Manafort, will decide to talk to save his own skin. Well, that could really leave Manafort in a desperate situation, and he could pay a big price if he's hung out to dry by Gates. So it puts a lot more pressure on Manafort to cooperate, or he could be facing the consequences. Lena, Jeff?
Absolutely. All right, Dave, thank you.